who is David Miscavige? Let's even like, because you said L. Ron Hubbard founded Scientology.
Yeah.
Let's go to the story of how we transitioned from that to David Miscavige.
The current leader of Scientology. He was actually not selected by L. Ron Hubbard to take over, but ended up usurping power and taking over.
It sounds like Stalin and Trotsky and communism. A similar story. It's the person, oftentimes in the situation, it's not the natural successor to power. It's the one that takes power.
Right. I think the quote, sometime it gets attributed to David Miscavige, is power is not given, it is assumed.
Yeah.
Something like that. The last 6 years of L. Ron Hubbard's life, he was off in a seclusion, essentially hiding from lawsuits. Now, by the time Hubbard went off into seclusion, Miscavige had sort of already risen up through the ranks of the Sea Organization. Now, Miscavige was like a teenager, either like 11, 12, 13, or something like that. Miscavige was not born into Scientology, but he was a young boy when his father got into Scientology.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So Miscavige did start working as a Sea Org member. So there's one organization that existed to essentially serve Hubbard directly and to represent his interests, and that was called the Commodore. He was the Commodore of the Sea Organization. The Commodore's Messengers Organization, we're going to call it the CMO. Miscavige started working for the CMO pretty early on in his Sea Org career. By the way, as did Mike Rinder. Mm-hmm. Mini Mike. Okay. And so he just became known as a doer, like a guy who'll get it done. No excuses, no stops, get it done. So he had made a name for himself in the CMO by the time Hubbard went off into seclusion. Now, when he went off into seclusion, he took two other CMO, or I'm going to call them messengers, right? Commodore's messengers. He took two other messengers with him, Pat and Annie Broker. Now, it has been said by people, Mike Rinder has told me, he goes, the reason Pat and Annie went off with LRH isn't necessarily because he desperately wanted them to, but partly because we could afford to let them go. We didn't necessarily need them.
Sure.
Okay. And between the two of them, Annie was the one who was like a really compassionate person, intelligent person, caring person.
Was there a possible trajectory of this world where she was the one that took over?
Yes. In fact, Pat and Annie Broker were the two people that were supposed to take over. Mm-hmm. Okay. But because Pat and Annie were with Hubbard in seclusion, Miscavige basically had the complete run of the operation without any oversight from Hubbard. The only way any information would get from Scientology world to Hubbard is Miscavige and Pat Broker would meet at a confidential location, and Miscavige would give Broker any information he wanted to go to LRH. So if Miscavige wanted to get rid of somebody, all he had to do was feed LRH false information that this person had been caught doing something treasonous. Mm-hmm. And then he would get in response some order from L. Ron Hubbard to get rid of this person. So are there so many similarities between various communist regimes and fascist regimes?
Well, Hitler did the same thing when he became the supreme leader. He had to take power. Yeah, he had to wait for the president to die. But the whole time, there's a control of information and a slow aggregation of power. Of course, with nations, it's different because if you control the military, you control a lot. So you have to also get the generals on your side and so on. But I'm sure in this situation, there's similar kind of dynamics. You have to get certain people on your side, control the flow of information, let the original founder, the original leader die off.
Yeah.
And make sure that you are the one that's left with the power.
Right. So whereas Pat and Annie are off with LRH, all of Scientology's attorneys and accountants and lobbyists and whatever, they all know Dave. Dave's the one they deal with. Mm-hmm. So, LRH passes away. Pat and Annie make this appearance. Nobody knows Pat and Annie. Everybody knows Dave. And so he ended up getting rid of Pat and Annie. This is a very short, perhaps slightly bastardized version of it. Of Miscavige, basically, they had been ushering just suitcases of cash to L. Ron Hubbard during this time, and so you have Miscavige handing boatloads of cash to Pat Broker. Pat would do crazy things like hide the money in the walls of houses and dig pits and everything. So Miscavige basically threatened to turn Pat Broker over to the IRS for tax evasion. Pat Broker's still alive.
Is he a Scientologist or no?
No. He basically went away and kept his mouth shut. She died a handful of years ago. She stayed a loyal Sea Org member until the very end. But literally, like Miscavige put her on menial tasks, like she had no authority whatsoever. She was just put on menial tasks, washing dishes, but not really, groundskeeper, just stupid low-level assistant, paper pusher stuff. She never operated with any actual authority, even though she was supposed to be the one to take over, her and Pat.
So on David Miscavige, difficult question, but can you make both the case that he is a good man who's misunderstood and the case that he's not a good man?
First of all, I believe that Miscavige is a true believer in Scientology. I do believe that.
That's a really important question. So
Yeah.
Do you think he believes in all the thetans and all of that?
He definitely believes in that. I think he believes in Scientology, but in a different way than all other Scientologists, because he's aware of a lot more information, damaging information about L. Ron Hubbard and the true story of Scientology than most people. So his version of belief is different. I'll give you one example here. So Scientology's bridge to total freedom goes up to what they call OT8, operating thetan level 8. Mm-hmm. Okay. Scientologists have all been told that L. Ron Hubbard, before he passed, completed putting together OT 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15. Mm-hmm. It's just sitting in the vault, waiting to be released. This is part of the Scientology belief system. Because remember, I said going up Scientology's bridge to total freedom is how you're supposed to get back to your native godlike state. Mm-hmm. Well, all the Scientologists in the world who've already done OT8 know that they haven't gotten there, but they still believe in Scientology because they're told there's more. But wait, there's more. Mm-hmm. Miscavige knows there is no more. So Miscavige knows the fundamental promise of being able to achieve full operating thetan is a lie. He knows L. Ron Hubbard didn't accomplish that. So therefore, no one else is going to accomplish it as well. If L. Ron Hubbard had accomplished it, Miscavige knows, well, he didn't write it up. He didn't leave instructions for how anyone else would accomplish it. So no matter what, Miscavige knows that the fundamental promise that what Scientology is saying they will be able to deliver to mankind is a lie. Now, it's going to sound like I'm contradicting myself because it sounds like I'm saying, well, he knows it's bullshit. I think he believes that L. Ron Hubbard just failed to finish his work, mm-hmm. and he's kind of hoping L. Ron Hubbard's going to come back to finish the job. Because L. Ron Hubbard did tell the people at the international management base, at least a core of them, that he was coming back. Now, we know that David Miscavige believed this because right around the 21-year mark, he was supposed to come back like 21 years after he died. Mm-hmm. Right around the 21-year mark, David Miscavige was getting busy putting some things in place that had to get done in case L. Ron Hubbard came back. So we know he at least believed to that level.
Do you believe that like L. Ron Hubbard can sort of enter his own body?
No, that's not how it works in Scientology.
Okay. So you can't have a transfer of thetans.
If you were full OT, you could.
Can you describe the OT again? So OT levels, OT 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to the 8. What are they? How do you get to level 1?
I'm going to answer this question by first connecting some dots.
Yes.
Okay. We spoke earlier in the interview about achieving your native godlike state. That in Scientology is called native state. Okay. Native state and full operating thetan mean the exact same thing. Mm-hmm. Okay. Because at native state, you are a fully operating thetan. Operating meaning operating in your full capacity. So OT means operating thetan. Mm-hmm. So the upper confidential half of Scientology's bridge are called the OT levels, the operating thetan levels. And remember, they're confidential. So most Scientologists have not done these levels. They don't know what's on them. It is on these levels that you learn about the Xenu and the body thetan story.
Can you describe Xenu, please?
We spoke earlier about how at the lower non-confidential levels of Scientology's bridge, Hubbard is saying that what's wrong with you is your reactive mind.
Yes.
Okay. Well, in Scientology, once you've gotten rid of your reactive mind, that is what's called the state of clear. Mm-hmm. Okay, so after you finish state of clear, the next thing on the bridge is the OT levels. Mm-hmm. Well, if you've already gotten rid of your active mind, what the heck are you supposed to do now? Well, now L. Ron Hubbard says, okay, first, what was wrong with you was just your reactive mind. But now the next thing you have to resolve, the next thing that's wrong with you is you actually have tens of thousands of thetans stuck to your body, and they all have their own reactive minds.
Oh, wow.
You have to audit the thetans.
How do you audit the thetans? Are these like different shades of your inner mind, and you just have to try to access them somehow.
You use the e-meter, just like we spoke about, except now you've got a divider that separates the cans so they don't short circuit, and you hold both cans in one hand, and you have the e-meter in front of you. So now you're auditing yourself. You're telepathically talking to the thetans that are stuck to you. You are thinking the commands instead of saying them out loud, and you sort of do drills where you practice looking for e-meter reads at the instant you have a thought. You're telepathically auditing spirits that L. Ron Hubbard says are stuck to your body. Does this sound like a recipe for a mental breakdown?
Or a heck of a mental journey. Wherever that leads, it could lead anywhere. It probably lead to a very bad place, right?
Very often does. And you combine that with the fact that Scientology is against any forms of mental help or health outside of Scientology, and you have a recipe for disaster. Now, you might go, where did all these spirits come from that are stuck to your body? This is where Xenu comes into play. So Hubbard says that 75 million years ago, Xenu was basically a dictator at the Galactic Confederation is like 70 something or 80 something planets somewhere in the Milky Way. And Xenu was like a dictator, an overlord for either one of these planets or the whole system. And they had a population problem. And Xenu was like, we need to get rid of like half the people. So we called them all in for tax audits. L. Ron Hubbard didn't like the IRS. So of course the story has to do with tax audits. Okay. Called them all in for tax audits, said, psych bitches, froze them in glycol, loaded them up on space planes, flew them to Earth. Remember, the story has to be Earth because the story is what's wrong with us. Flew them to Earth, dropped them in volcanoes, blew them up with hydrogen bombs, and then captured them with like spirit magnets. I'm making up words because, okay. Yeah. And these disembodied spirits of these people that got blown up have just been blown in the wind here on Earth, and they attach themselves to things, and they can be in the environment, and they stick to bodies and everything. And they all have reactive minds. So at Scientology's upper levels, if you get sick or you have cancer or there's something wrong with you, Scientology will say, that's one of your body thetans. You need to get some auditing to fix the body thetans.
So this story, you do it with a kind of bit of a chuckle, but when done seriously, so it's just told in a serious way, or written down.
It's written down.
And you read it.
By most accounts, Scientologists struggle when they read this for the first time because this is not consistent with what Scientologists are hoping for is on the OT levels. They're hoping for some real life-changing magic. The way these things are described and sold, they're hoping that these OT levels are going to make them, give them the ability to go like completely independent of their body at will.
Yeah.
Exteriorize from your body, go back into your body, like have some real spirit powers.
So first it's kind of a shock. But then you still probably believe, you hope.
Yeah.
And you might turn into on yourself, self-critical that I'm just not strong enough yet.
Yeah. Because also part of Scientology, remember, it works 100% of the time when used 100% correctly. And if it doesn't, it could be because something's not being done right, but it also could be because you're doing bad things that you're not telling people about. Like if you're committing present time overt crimes, sins, Scientologists would be like, that's part of the reason auditing isn't working on you is because you're committing criminal behavior that you're not being honest about. So every Scientologist is sort of incentivized to make auditing work on them. Okay. Now, Lex, this is where it gets a little crazy. On OT3, you learn about the body thetans for the first time. When you finish OT3, you attest to having achieved the state of having no more body thetans. And then you start OT4, and he's like, psych, you got more BTs, except those other BTs, they had drug problems, and that's why you couldn't find them the first time. So we're going to do something a little different here, do something a little different there. Got to get rid of these BTs that were addicted to drugs, okay? Then you finish OT4, and you're thinking, man, I hope we get to the good stuff soon. And then you get to OT5, and he's like, psych, you got more BTs. You couldn't find these BTs because they were all bunched up together in clusters. And first you have to break up the clusters, and then you can get rid of the BTs. And you're like, okay, got to do that.
And this was all L. Ron Hubbard approved.
Yeah, this is from L. Ron Hubbard. And then after you finish OT5, you get rid of all the BT clusters. OT6 is just a training course to teach you how to audit OT7. Well, OT7 is now more BTs, except it's in the environment and stuff. You're trying to locate BTs. You can find them on your body, but it's just more BTs. Okay. And then OT8 is, remember we talked about in all these auditing sessions throughout the entire Scientology bridge, you have people who've run hundreds or thousands of past life whole track incidents. Mm-hmm. These memories have become part of their self-identity of who they even think they are. Yeah. OT8, you go through all these past life recalls, and essentially, I'm oversimplifying this a little bit. He goes, psych, all those past life memories weren't yours. They were your BTs. And he goes, now that you've discovered this, now you know who you are not, and you are ready to find out who you really are. Well, now you're supposed to find out who you really are on OT 9 and 10. Those don't exist.
Do we know they don't exist?
Yes. In fact, the whole story of how that became known is part of how David Miscavige was able to get rid of Pat Broker and take over power, because it was believed that Pat Broker was in possession of the upper unreleased OT levels. And when Miscavige determined that he was not, and there weren't in fact any levels, that was bad. That was a bad day to be David Miscavige, because he now knew he had something on his hands he could not get himself out of. He's like,
So there's no gap for faith to seep in, that there is a level 9 and 10 and 11 and 12.
Oh, the faith is there. Scientologists believe that these things do exist.
Yeah.
L. Ron Hubbard didn't leave anything behind.
Does David Miscavige believe they exist?
Oh, no, he knows they don't exist. No, meaning, when I say exist, I don't mean do advanced levels of spiritual awareness exist. When I said it means, did L. Ron Hubbard write down what anyone is supposed to do? Yeah. That's called OT9. That doesn't exist.
So you're saying David Miscavige believes that they can be written down, so they exist sort of in the Platonic sense, and L. Ron Hubbard is the only one that can write it down?
Yes.
So his faith is really deep.
Oh, you mean his faith that only L. Ron Hubbard could have ever been the one to do it?
The full principles, beliefs of Scientology, he is... Are you sure he believes?
That what exactly?
Everything about Scientology, that is true.
To the best of my ability to know that I believe it to be true. Like, I'll give you small, even stupid examples. Like Mike Rinders told a story where at the international base, Miscavige actually had like a contraption built into the ground, like grounded into the ground to come out, where you could hold it. And here's something he sort of came up with to it could ground your BTs. Could get your BTs, that if you were feeling overstimulated or something. I'm probably slightly bastardizing this story, but he came up with this as a great idea, something to help someone destimulate if their BTs were getting a little too overactive use. Now, so that's a stupid story. That's sort of like, well, it shows you he believes in the concept of BTs if he's creating little rods to get rid of them, to ground them into the earth.
Well, he could be conjuring up the stories because he understands the power of myth and narrative and so on to inspire.
Sure.
But also, if we look at history, both with this is the interesting thing, because I've been reading a lot about Hitler and Stalin, and it seems like both of them, in different ways, believed in the stories they were telling. Even when the stories, this is the fascinating, especially with Hitler and propaganda, where they were literally conjured up at first, but then you start to believe your own propaganda. With Stalin, I think what he always believed is the bigger ideal of pure communism, and anything justifies the journey to communism, because it will ultimately be good for humanity to achieve the state of pure communism. And then he's a godlike figure that can bring humanity there. But like with Hitler, it's interesting because like there's constant propaganda that he knows is not true. A little bit. There's got to be doubt, but then all doubt is removed very quickly.
Yeah.
So I guess humans are this is how they operate.
Yeah. The conversation about David Miscavige gets really interesting, because I could give you if I wanted to make the argument that he didn't believe, I could give you a dozen examples to make that argument. Yeah. I just happen to think that he believes in a different way. Yeah. Whereas your average Scientologist believes that L. Ron Hubbard was practically infallible, that he thought of everything in advance, he took care of everything before he left. And Miscavige still believes in like the main structure of this thing, but he's like, oh shit, it's falling to me to figure out how to actually make this thing happen. I think Miscavige sees himself as someone who has, to a certain degree, had to go back and fix L. Ron Hubbard's mistakes.
Do you think he sees himself as doing good for the world?
I do.
What about for the people of Scientology?
I think in his own way he does. I don't think he wakes up thinking he's screwing Scientologists. I think he sees everyone else as screwing him. I think he sees that it is his job to expand Scientology throughout the world and accomplish the aims of Scientology. And he sees that it's not happening. And he thinks if everyone else would just stop, if everyone else would get out of his way and stop creating problems for him, it would happen. Like, I do think he sees himself as someone who is doing good. I think that's fair to say. I think the evidence shows that.
What about the effects of clearly power and influence that he's had and money?
Yeah, without question, that has served as a corrupting force.
It has.
Without question.
Have you seen sort of evidence of that he's changed over time?
After the 1993 IRS exemption that Scientology won back, and this information comes from Mike Rinder, that's when David Miscavige, as soon as the checks on his power were removed, Miscavige's behavior changed markedly.